In the headlines, the two Koreas exchanged a list of candidates who are hoping to meet with their families separated by the Korean War at the upcoming reunion slated for next month. President Park Geun-hye stresses again her government's top economic priority to increase the middle class to 70% of the nation's population and the employment rate to 70%. Plus, the U.S. and NATO are inching closer to striking Syria for its use of chemical weapons in the country's civil war, while Russia and China are warning against any sort of military aggression. Well, these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Thursday, August 29th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with more positive signs in inter-Korean relations. The two Koreas are making progress with their normalization of their jointly run Kaesong industrial complex.
They will convene the first meeting of their joint committee on the factory zone next week. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
The two Koreas will convene a first meeting of their joint committee on the management of the Kaesong industrial complex on Monday in Kaesong. The two sides agreed on the specifics of the joint committee on Wednesday and exchanged their finalized documents on Thursday.
North Korea agreed this morning to hold the first meeting of the Joint Committee on the Kaesong Industrial Complex on September 2nd, as proposed by the South.
The Joint Committee, which will be headed by Kim Ki-young from the South and Park Cheol-soo from the North, will allow the Koreas to oversee the management of their joint business park together. The formation of such a committee was agreed upon by the two sides earlier this month as one of the safeguards against future unilateral closures. Operations at the factory zone have been suspended since April after the North unilaterally withdrew all of its workers amid an escalation in inter-Korean tensions. To prevent such a shutdown from happening again, the Joint Committee will hold a meeting once every quarter and hold additional discussions if needed. The two sides will also create 4 subcommittees to ensure the safety of South Korean workers in Kaesong. One subcommittee will ensure the safety of South Korean workers in Kaesong, one will look after the protection of South Korean assets, another will work toward raising the international competitiveness of the complex, and the last will oversee commutes in and out of the complex, communications, and the customs of South Korean workers. The subcommittees will hold meetings at least once a month. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry said that once the Joint Committee holds its first meeting, it'll be only a matter of time before operations resume at the business park, as the issue will surely be discussed. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And preparations for the upcoming reunions of families separated by the Korean War are well underway.
The two Koreas exchanged lists of candidates who wish to meet with their family members next month at the Mount Kumgang Resort in the north. The Korean National Red Cross said Thursday that it sent a list of 250 South Koreans to the north through its communication channel at the truce village of Panmunjom and received a list with 200 names from the communist state. The list will be used to check on the availability of the families, and the two sides will exchange on September 16th a final list of 100 people to take part in the event slated from September 25th to the 30th. Washington has stressed that the planned visit of a U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea on Friday is nothing more than a humanitarian mission to bring a detained American citizen home and is not linked to any other issues between the two countries.
The State Department says Human Rights Envoy Robert King will seek amnesty for Kenneth Bae, who was sentenced earlier this year to 15 years of hard labor in the North. Bae is accused of having tried to topple the regime. Washington is pushing for Bae, who is believed to be very ill, to be released so that he can be flown home for much-needed medical attention. The department added that King's visit has no connection to international efforts to reopen the six-party talks, which are aimed at denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. The King is scheduled to depart North Korea on Saturday, one day after arriving.
At the nation's top office, President Park Geun-hye continued on with her economic drive on this Thursday at a meeting with experts and leaders from Korea's medium-sized companies.
She again laid out her economic goals, which include building up the middle class and boosting the employment rate. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju has more.
President Park on Thursday reiterated the two major focuses of her administration's economic policy: restoring the country's shrinking middle class and realizing a creative economy. During a meeting of the National Economic Advisory Council Thursday morning, President Park said her government would put top priority on increasing the middle class to 70% of the nation's population and the employment rate to 70%. She said the two goals go hand in hand, as employment will be the foundation for increasing the middle class. The president put forth some ideas to reach this goal: creating high-quality part-time jobs, improving the working environment for women with children, and supporting dual-income families. President Park stressed that realizing a creative economy is not separate from her goal of increasing the middle class, as the creative economy would play a key role in reaching a 70% employment rate, which is the basis for middle-class expansion. The president pledged to set up a regulatory infrastructure so that individuals and the private sector can fully display their creativity. Later in the day, President Park met with leaders of mid-sized enterprises and promised that support, such as in R&D and taxation, will continuously be provided even after small firms grow into mid-sized companies. She said that she is well aware of the hardships they face, pointing out that 77 types of government support measures provided to small companies disappear all of a sudden after they grow into mid-sized enterprises, while 20 new regulations are imposed on them. President Park described mid-sized firms as the backbone of the economy, saying they greatly contribute to job creation and economic revitalization. She promised to set up a system, what she called a growth ladder, in which small firms could steadily grow into mid-sized firms and mid-sized firms into conglomerates. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's largest automaker Hyundai may be suffering from disruptions caused by extended strikes of its workers at home, but it's a completely different story in China.
Our Hwang Jae reports that the company's sales in the neighboring country are growing at its fastest pace ever this year.
Hyundai and Kia's high-speed growth in China seems unstoppable. Hyundai Motor, the world's fifth largest automaker, and its affiliate Kia Motors reported sales last Friday of 1 million units in China so far this year, the fastest pace since it entered the market. The automakers had sold around 900,000 cars through July. Hyundai has been posting sales of 1 million units in shorter periods of time for the past 3 years, but this time, for the first time, it shortened its pace by 2 months. Despite rising concerns about China's auto market due to the nation's slowing growth, the auto market grew over 15% in the January to July period from the same period a year earlier. And Hyundai and Kia have almost doubled that growth pace, growing 30%. That's the third fastest growth rate among automakers selling cars in China after U.S. automaker Ford and China's local Great Wall Motors. Hyundai and Kia's rapid growth in China comes from rising sales of new models like the K3 and China's expanding sport utility vehicle market, which has raised sales of Hyundai's Tucson by 75% and Kia's Sportage by 30% during the same period. Hyundai and Kia plan to improve their brand image by engaging in social activities and using targeted marketing strategies to maintain their growth momentum in China. The car makers also plan to expand their factories in the nation. Hwang Jae, Arirang News.
On to the latest on the dramatic crackdown of left-wing Korean activists. Following raids on the homes and offices of the accused on Wednesday, the National Intelligence Service today instituted a travel ban.
The group is charged with conspiring to stage an armed rebellion and assist North Korea in the event of a war. But the suspect's representative says the case is a lie. Arirang reports.
It's the first time a sitting member of parliament is under investigation for sedition in Korea. Lawmaker Lee Seok-gi of the ultra-left Unified Progressive Party and 13 other left-leaning figures are accused of setting up a secret organization to overthrow the South Korean legal systems. The National Intelligence Service has placed a travel ban on the 14 people. Already, 3 officials of Lee's party have been arrested on sedition charges. The spy agency says it has secured audio files of the secret organization, conspiring to arm itself with weapons and to stage sabotage attacks on crucial communications facilities. The group was also accused of planning to block major railways to delay movements of people and supplies in the event of a war with North Korea. Representative Lee Seok-gi, who is at the center of the conspiracy, on Thursday denied the charges. He said in a meeting of party leaders that the spy agency, which has been criticized for meddling in last year's presidential election, fabricated the case as part of political repression against left-leaning politicians. Yuri-an, Arirang News.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions is on the rise.
closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report. Less than
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
meeting came on.
News are trying to cover up the South's true intentions.
The U.S. and its Western allies are on the verge of going ahead with a military intervention in Syria, while some countries like Russia and the UN chief are calling for caution and restraint. Akanya Lee has more.
In an interview with U.S. network PBS on Wednesday, President Barack Obama said Washington has concluded that the Syrian government is responsible for the recent chemical attacks that killed hundreds of civilians near Damascus.
Well, what's happened has been heartbreaking.
President Obama said no decision has been made yet, but he was urging a limited military strike against Syria to deter future use of chemical weapons.
There is a prospect, a possibility in which chemical weapons that can have devastating effects could be directed at us. And we want to make sure that that does not happen.
The president's comments come after Western nations failed to convince Russia at a UN meeting to support a resolution for military action against Syria. In the UK, though, Prime Minister David Cameron's leadership was challenged on Wednesday as he was forced to delay his plans for imminent military strike. The opposition Labour Party said it wanted more scrutiny over its decision of such magnitude. As expected, however, the key Western military alliance, NATO, gave its backing for intervention, with NATO Secretary General saying President Assad needs to be held accountable for his actions. Earlier on Wednesday, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appealed for world powers to hold off on any military action, at least until chemical inspectors in Syria have finished their work. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The radiation leaks at Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant have sparked a public food scare in Korea, with many consumers wondering whether it is safe to eat fish from Japan or anywhere near the country. Song Ji-sun reports on the fear in the fish aisle.
It's an early morning at this large fisheries wholesale market in Seoul. It should be bustling with retailers and consumers, but far fewer transactions are being made as people are refraining from buying fish over concerns about radiation.
Consumer concerns about the safety of Japanese fish imports are growing here in Korea, with more and more people steering clear of seafood from Japan.
Consumers ask first whether the product is from Japan. They become extremely sensitive, so they won't purchase anything, even the smallest fish, if it's from Japan.
Our sales have dropped by 80 to 90%. Seoul's Fisheries Corporation conducts radiation screenings every day, and the results come out normal all the time. But consumers seem to be rejecting all Japanese products.
According to data from Korea's large supermarket chains, sales of pollock and mackerel, which were found to contain traces of cesium in some Japanese imports, dropped by 60% and 29% respectively in August from the same month a year ago. In an attempt to ease public concerns about the issue, the government has boosted the number of inspections on seafood imports from once to twice a week. But this simple step is not enough to put people's minds at ease, with many fearing that with hundreds of tons of highly radioactive water pouring into the ocean, it is bound to circulate around the world.
Contaminated fishes are not here in yet, but the problem is going to be starting probably from next month, for example, because now the plants are beginning to leak those highly contaminated water.
Tokyo sent a report on the latest radiation leak and its planned countermeasures to Seoul on Wednesday, more than 2 weeks after Korea made an official request. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
On our news in-depth tonight, we'd like to delve into sides of Korea, which apparently only Koreans are unaware of. It's all outlined in the new book, A Different Republic of Korea, about which only Koreans are ignorant.
And here in the studio tonight, we are joined by the book's author, Professor Emmanuel Pastreich of Kyung-hee University, who's also the director of the Asia Institute. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, your book has a very catchy title. Can you tell us what prompted you to write the book in the first place?
Well, I think I was really thinking about how Korea is perceived around the world, and we have had a little bit of an issue in terms of Samsung or LG or Hyundai or global brands. But when you ask people what is Korea beyond that, there's Psy, there's a little bit of popular culture, but there isn't really an understanding about the depth of the tradition, and that really is an essential ingredient for Korea.
Now, in your book, you wrote about the cultural and intellectual potential of Korea. Now, what's your assessment of true worth of Korea, and why is it important to explore them now?
Right. So we have tended to focus in Korea on the rapid growth, basically from the 1960s, and this is very impressive, that 50, 60 years of growth. However, we really, as Korea plays a more important role in the world, that tradition, right? What led Korea there? That's not where it started, right? That was the result. And that brings us back to the amazing traditions in the Confucian tradition and Buddhism, important historical figures who played an important role. One of the aspects of this that we can highlight, I think, is the tradition of the Sunbi, as we say, which is a term which I think is probably unfamiliar to many people.
So can you tell us a little bit more about this Sunbi and this tradition of the Sunbi and how it relates to this false myth that you've also said Koreans have adopted over the years?
Well, so the myth, we would say, has been that Korea grew so fast, just somehow back in 1960, someone decided, oh, we're going to grow quickly. But that required a very sophisticated intellectual, philosophical tradition to be able to make that sort of, 5-year plans and to work everything out. And that, I think, has a lot to do with this tremendous Sunbi tradition. So the Sunbi was this sort of committed intellectual, right? Somebody who was well educated, who had a strong sense of commitment to society, and also had a sort of a intellectual and artistic sensibility. That was the ideal. I'm not saying all Koreans were Sunbi, by the way. But what we have to think about in the global sphere is, if we take Japan, for example. So Japan, if you go to Africa and you say samurai or ninja, right? Everybody knows. Most people know what this term means. It's part of global culture. But Korea, the brand names are known, but there's no piece like that of global culture which is distinctly Korean in origin.
Now, you also mentioned in your book Korea's inferiority complex, which is largely stemming from the history of Korea being stuck between large and powerful nations like Russia, China, and Japan. Would getting rid of this complex somehow fundamentally change Korea's culture or identity?
Korea is a very advanced country in terms of technology, in terms of its culture, in terms of its administration, some of the best practices in the world. Korea has to play a role, and it's increasingly doing in terms of aid, in terms of setting a model for what people around the world can look up to.
So if you're saying that Japan has a samurai identity, Korea could have a Sunbi identity of what somebody doing something for the greater good and has the community in mind. You also mentioned this 1,000 mirrors as a concept for Korea to take in order to globalize its marketing.
Right. So the 1,000 mirrors, Korea has tremendous potential, but there's a tendency, for better or worse, that Koreans are not always perfectly aligned. So it's an analogy, right, to say if you had 1,000 little pieces of glass, of mirror fragments on the ground, then they just sort of glitter and they're nice, but they don't really do anything per se. But if you tilt each one slightly so that they all focus their light in one point, then you get a tremendous sort of energy there.
Right. Well, Professor, thank you very much for coming in today. It was good to see you again.
It's a pleasure always. Thank you.
The teams for the UEFA Champions League group stage have been set, giving football fans around the world something to be excited about.
And Stephen Che joins us in the SportsCenter to give us the details. Stephen.
Hey guys, the 32 best teams from leagues across Europe have assembled for the Champions League group stage, with a tournament draw scheduled to take place early Friday morning Korea time. At the draw that's being held in Monaco, 8 groups of 4 will be created, with teams being selected from 4 seeding pots based on their UEFA club coefficients. The only restriction on the draw is that teams from the same association cannot be drawn against each other. Unfortunately, we won't be seeing Dutch club PSV Eindhoven and their star player Park Geun-hye in the tournament, as they fell to AC Milan in a playoff match early Thursday. And staying on the pitch, South Korean national team defender Hong Sung-ho is headed to the Bundesliga to join his compatriots in Europe. Hong's K-League team, Jeju United, announced that he left for Germany earlier on Thursday to finalize the transfer deal with FC Augsburg, adding that he'll be back in time for training with the national team. However, the 24-year-old sustained a back injury in a K-League Classic match on Wednesday, casting doubts on his participation in the upcoming international friendlies with Haiti and Croatia. Finally, it's time to take a look at Thursday's top KBO matchup. The Doosan Bears faced off against the NC Dinos in Changwon. It's a rainy day for baseball in Korea, but game on! Second inning, Bears Lee Jong-wook hits a double to right. The base is clear. Lee gets to third. Now, next batter, we have Min Byung-hun hits a single. Lee comes home. It's 4-0 Doosan. Now, let's head to the bottom of the inning. Lee Sang-ho hits to the third baseman. The throw home, it's out. The catcher to first. Double play. Bears pitcher No Kyung-eun gets out of the jam. Then a rain delay in the 5th. The game resumes, and Doosan goes on to win this one with a final score of 6-0. And looking at the scores from around the league, we have Lotte defeating Hanwha 1-0, SK over Samsung 5-2, and Nexon and Kia had their game canceled. That does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Time to go over to our Kelly Park for the latest weather forecast. Hello, Kelly.
Hi guys. Well, we got a fair amount of precipitation here in the central regions for the first half of the day today, but there are still some areas seeing some spotty showers with strong gusty winds picking up.
Right, I guess people will have to keep those umbrellas handy, especially those living down in the south.
That's right, Chia. The heavy rain is forecast to fall overnight along with quite a bit of lightning and thunder, so make sure to be careful if you're outside. Now, Cholla provinces will be seeing over 120 millimeters of precipitation until tomorrow morning, while the Chungcheong and the Gyeongsang regions will be receiving around 30 to 80 millimeters. However, we're not done with the rain just yet. Typhoon Kangray, that's moving northeastward from Taiwan, will influence the southern part of the Jeju Island as it edges a bit closer to Japan, so make sure to stay prepared. Now for tomorrow, mostly cloudy skies are in the picture. We'll still have that count of those isolated showers in the south, but notice how much cooler it'll be below the 30s. So it's going to feel a whole lot better even if you do have to dodge those showers. Now Seoul will reach up to 28 in the afternoon, while Daegu, Gwangju, Busan all up in the upper 20s. Daejeon also hits a high of 28, and Mount Kumgang back in the teens at 19. And that's all for this hour. I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
Thanks, Callie. And that's our broadcast on this Thursday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.